Not too long ago, I put out a video covering some of the special enemies hidden throughout Halo Combat Evolved. Notable battles with named individuals that most people probably aren't even aware they're taking part in. This is effectively the second part, but this time I'll be talking about the sequel, Halo 2. Generally speaking, a boss fight is very obvious. You're placed into an arena designed specifically around a certain encounter with a foe that's typically much harder to take down than many others before it. It might be a commanding officer or a rival that represents an important moment in the narrative of that particular story. In some cases, though, the lore surrounding an enemy can be established after the fact, recontextualizing what would normally be a thoughtless defeat of mere cannon fodder into something potentially meaningful. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I had fun with the last video, so let's do it again. Full disclosure, a lot of this video will be going over the not-so-secret bosses because there's cool lore surrounding them. So if you're put off by that, then here's your sign to click away. Before we jump straight in though, there's someone I forgot from Halo Combat Evolved. Lat Ravamee, shipmaster of the Truth and Reconciliation, was part of the battle group that pursued the Pillar of Autumn as it fled to Installation 04. Covenant spacecraft are far deadlier than their human counterparts, so in most cases humanity lost when it came to naval engagements, but that doesn't mean they weren't occasionally able to get a few licks in through sheer tenacity and force of will. The brief space battle that ensued just above the ring's atmosphere when humanity and the Covenant arrived at their destination was no different, but Cortana was able to land a strike on the Truth and Reconciliation. Though it wasn't destroyed completely, it was damaged enough that Lat Ravamee had to land it just above the Forerunner megastructure's surface. This left his vehicle in a very exposed state, but utilizing the relative safety of the construct's atmosphere allowed him and his crew to make repairs without the fear of their lives ending to the cold vacuum of space. This outcome would lead to other, far different problems though, mostly in the form of humans forcing their way onto his ship. At first, his enemies seemed to have no need to desecrate the halls of his vehicle with their filthy footsteps, but that would soon change when prisoners had been stored within. One such hostage was none other than Captain Jacob Keyes. Lat and his crew likely had absolutely no idea who this worthless human was, and as a result, they couldn't have known that a young boy he once knew was on his way to rescue him. This child had changed quite a bit though, and had become the single most terrifying soldier the Covenant had ever seen. Lat had positioned himself within his ship's bridge when he'd begun receiving reports that a single human in a suit of armor, accompanied by a few plucky accomplices, was actively slaughtering his crew and wading through the newly created pile of bodies of his former compatriots. There was no way they'd make it to his location though. Those that served under him were ample in number. They'd surely outgunned the foolish humans at some point. Scores of Sangheli warriors, Ungoi foot soldiers, Kigyar mercenaries, and hulking Letgolo gestalts sat between them. The odds were obviously in his favor. Lat had also likely become distracted by a peculiar transmission he had discovered, one he was likely dissecting at the large terminal located within his ship's bridge. Let me explain what I mean here. When Halo Combat Evolved turned 10 years old, an anniversary version of the game was released to celebrate. This new way to play the old title was largely the same experience as the original, aside from a new coat of paint, the addition of gameplay modifiers in the form of skulls, and brand new hidden cutscenes. One of these canonical curiosities is tucked away in the corners of each campaign mission. They were added as an additional reason for old players to return to this newer release of the game. The story told throughout these is largely from the perspective of 343 Guilty Spark during his 100 millennia solitude on his ring. Some of these, however, are far more modern, one of which being the terminal located in the Truth and Reconciliation's bridge. I believe that each and every one of these secret story bits was actually discovered by the Chief, and therefore this particular cutscene was almost certainly viewed by Lat as well. This video isn't meant to convince you of this though. If you want to hear why I believe this to be the case in much greater detail, go check out my video on the subject. It's actually really cool. Link in the description, and I'll remind you at the end of the video too. The terminal by Lat is a conversation between 343 Guilty Spark and the extremely limited AI that was housed within the Truth and Reconciliation systems. Lat was almost certainly engrossed in this particular communication because when the Chief slipped into the bridge, he was blissfully unaware of his presence. It wasn't until the familiar pounding rhythm of ballistic weaponry rang throughout the room that he realized what was going on. The demon had made his way onto the bridge and had already begun tearing his underlings to pieces. Shock and likely terror flooded his body as the Ungoi and Sangheli stationed nearby fell. This was it. A final stand between him and the ruthless human warrior many of his kind had begun referring to as some kind of devil. He bellowed and ran at his armored assailant with an energy sword in hand, but unfortunately for Lat, he'd brought a blade to a sniper fight. His high rank of shipmaster meant he had been granted shields with much greater strength than those that served beneath him, but it didn't matter how strong his protection might have been. No amount of shielding would hold against this ferocious enemy. Several 50 caliber rounds exited the barrel of the demon's sniper rifle, and milliseconds later entered Lat's skull. When they made their way through the other side of his cranium, they carried bits of bone and brain matter with them. His mind was akin to a dry shrub, and the bullet that slipped through was a roaring fire that instantaneously burned away all he ever was. Throughout the entirety of Halo 2, you'll encounter deadly Kig-Yar warriors wielding beam rifles. These sharpshooters are infamous for being exceptionally deadly. So much so that they became known for their ability to hit virtually any target with almost supernatural timing and precision. Each of these deadly pirates was personally selected by Regret himself thanks to their seemingly innate skill set. Though very few were privy to the name of their group, the Jha'Kaar, many heard the rumors of Kig-Yar snipers hitting shots that were, for all intents and purposes, impossible. There's no doubt whatsoever that many innocent lives were ended by their feathered hands. The Master Chief encountered many members within this elite subset of Jackal Soldier while creeping throughout the war-torn streets of New Mombasa and across the surface of Installation 05. Each time they spotted him, they were almost certainly elated by the prospect that sat before them. Culturally, the Kig-Yar are pirates, meaning that the collection of treasure is valued above all else. They care not for any potential honor in a fight, just the overall worth of a particular bounty. With that said, there was no greater quarry, no single soldier worth as much as the demon. If any Kig-Yar soldier managed to take him down, the riches they would receive would be unimaginable. So each time a member of the Jha'Kaar placed the Master Chief within their sights, their excitement was undoubtedly palpable. It didn't matter though. Even if they did have some kind of mystical ability to land every shot they took, this particular enemy had a strange magic of his own: luck. They may have had quick trigger fingers, but each shot they fired either missed or simply wasn't enough to penetrate the demon's energy shielding. Once their location had been revealed, a quick battle rifle burst to the dome was usually enough to end their pursuit of treasure forever. After all, hollow bones break easily when smashed with gauntleted fists. Each time the Chief found a member of the Jha'Kaar, he'd put them down, totally unaware of the death-dealing potential they posed, because in the end, there was no greater threat than the Chief himself. Whether or not more of this deadly group still exists, or what their current allegiances would be, is unknown. The first Scarab you'll ever come in contact with while playing through the Halo games is the Type 47A Ultra Heavy Assault Platform, or as it was known by the Covenant, the Protos-Pattern Fortress Breaker. This gigantic quadrupedal monstrosity may appear to be a vehicle, but it's actually an ultra-heavy infantry unit. The giant metallic carapace is merely a vessel for a specific type of hunter colony composed of Roulo-Let Golo. The Roulo-Let Golo are different from the Mega-Let Golo, the standard hunter gestalts fought throughout each campaign, as they don't occur naturally. Instead, they were artificially engineered specifically to control excavation platforms such as the Scarabs. The Protos-Pattern Scarab is mounted with a front-facing ultra-heavy focus cannon, as well as two large plasma repeaters, one located on the front of the platform, the other by the rear. A supervisor appears to be required for the hulking entity to properly function, which is why Sergeant Avery Johnson was able to take control of one and use it against Tartarus towards the end of Halo 2. Let Golo worms are living, breathing creatures, but on their own they aren't exactly intelligent. In large groups, however, this completely changes. Once enough individuals gather together, they form a gestalt and a distinct entity with intelligence, aspirations, and a unique sense of self. Though it's never been recorded, we can safely assume this would apply to the Roulo-Let Golo, just like any other version of their species. With that established, it's unclear just how much agency colonies mounted within Protos-Pattern Scarabs have. They're alive and are integral for the mechanism to function, so they must have some sense of awareness, but based on the fact that a quote-unquote supervisor is required for the vehicular infantry to function implies a distinct lack of free will. If that's the case, then the Roulo-Let Golo within each mining platform are no different than slaves, all of which are forced to march upon enemies they may very well have no desire to kill. This variant was genetically modified into existence though, so perhaps the ability to choose was bred out of them. Regardless of which of the two options is correct, I can't help but feel like their lives are tragic and that they're yet another victim to the many atrocities committed by the Covenant. One specific Protos-Pattern Scarab was dispatched to New Mombasa, where it and its crew would come weaponized face to helmeted face with the Master Chief. After leveling parts of the city and undoubtedly killing thousands, it was boarded by the demon. Without hesitation, he killed its crew, set the craft ablaze, and ended a life of slavery for the worms within. Sesa Refumee was a Sangheli warrior stationed at a Forerunner resource mine on a research operation during the Battle over Alpha Halo. The construct had been built in the orbit of Threshold, the immense gas giant that can be seen from the surface of that particular ring during most of the missions in Halo CE. When the Chief destroyed the construct using the Pillar of Autumn's reactors, most of the nearby Covenant fleet was destroyed, and those that survived fled, leaving Sesa and his compatriots stranded. After some time, 343 Guilty Spark eventually made his way to the gas mine and had a brief altercation with Sesa's underlings. When he finally came into contact with the elite, he tried to reason with him, explaining that his religion, the so-called Great Journey, was a sham. Activating the rings wouldn't help ascend them to godhood, instead it would kill every living being in the galaxy. Unlike literally every other Covenant creature he'd attempted to speak to prior, Sesa was actually willing to listen, and needless to say, he didn't like what he was hearing. With this newfound information, he transmitted these facts to any nearby Covenant forces that could receive his messages. As you can imagine, the prophets didn't take too kindly to his desertion, and they certainly didn't like that he was attempting to inform others of the real purpose of the rings. In response, they branded him a heretic, and dispatched Lat Ravamee, a freshly christened arbiter, to eliminate these quote-unquote heretics. With the help of Protos-Pattern, the white elite missing half of his jaw, the arbiter would lay waste to the gas mine, killing any Sangheli or Ungoi foolish enough to stand in his way. Eventually, he'd catch up with Sesa right before he was about to make his escape using a Seraph fighter that he had stored in one of the construct's hangar bays. Before he could board the vehicle, the arbiter would confront him, and the two of them would engage in combat. Using several holodrones, hologram-like pieces of technology designed to perfectly imitate his appearance and fighting style, Sesa was able to hold the arbiter off long enough to talk. During their battle, he tried to convince Thel of the truth. The prophets were lying, but he was just too blinded by faith to see it. In the end, his words fell upon deaf ears, and Sesa was killed. The so-called heretic may not have been able to convince Thel of the truth, but his words were enough to plant a seed of doubt in his mind. A seed that would eventually grow and blossom, leading him to break free of the Covenant and join the Master Chief on a quest to eliminate the High Prophet of Truth. Much later, to pay homage to Sesa, those that were associated with his name, Refumee, were granted special treatment within the Arbiter's newly formed faction, the Swords of Sanghelios.
It is just a shell.
Blasphemy!
Lod Mron, otherwise known as the High Prophet of Regret, was the youngest of 3 Sanchayum leaders during the Human Covenant War. Not to say that he was young, however. He lived to the ripe old age of 91. Before he had ascended to the position of Hierarch, he was known as the Vice Minister of Tranquility, and his job was to manage the Covenant's sizable relic hunting fleets. His brazen attitude set him apart from most other prophets thanks to the fact that he had spent a considerable amount of time working with elites. He even knew the Arbiter prior to Thel, a brutal and savage warrior named Ripa Morami. Thanks to the time spent with the Sangheli, he had picked up some of their personality traits, and as a result was often much more forthright than the typical Sanchayum. Lod was the first to discover the presence of humans on Harvest, using a Forerunner artifact they referred to as a luminary. These devices sort of functioned like galactic metal detectors for Forerunner artifacts, and contained coordinates for locations important to the mysterious race. This luminary had picked up an enormous quantity of potential new loot, and upon making this discovery, he informed the Vice Minister of Fortitude, a prophet that would eventually be known as Truth, in hopes that he would help him retrieve the stash. He thought that, together, they could overthrow the current prophet hierarchs and rule in their place, which would give them the ability to disperse the newly discovered Forerunner technology freely. What they didn't realize was that these supposed relics were actually humans, detected by the luminary and misinterpreted as objects instead of living beings. Eventually, Lod, along with the prophets that would come to be known as Truth and Mercy, took the luminaries that had been used to detect humankind on Harvest to an ancient device that lied at the center of a Forerunner ship within their holy city of High Charity. This object was referred to as the Oracle, and was actually a long-dormant mendicant bias, an ancient Forerunner AI. When the luminaries were inputted into his matrix, he spoke for the first time in thousands of years. Mendicant informed them of their error. The luminary wasn't detecting artifacts, it was locating reclaimers, or humans. He explained that this race had been chosen by the Forerunners to take their place as custodians of the galaxy. Lod didn't like what he was hearing, at all, and the 3 of them agreed to keep this secret. If the rest of the Covenant heard what Mendicant was saying, the prophets would be forced to step down from their positions of power. They had just been told this newly discovered species was directly linked with their gods, and there was no way the rest of the Covenant would allow the 3 of them to continue to lead, instead of these supposed reclaimers. So they made a pact to eliminate humankind and ensure that they'd never lose their newly acquired leadership roles. Many years later, a group of Covenant soldiers would discover a luminary on the planet Meridian and deliver it to Regret. Once the device had been analyzed, it revealed the location of the portal to the Ark, which just so happened to be on Earth, humanity's homeworld. In an instant, and without informing the other High Prophets of his plans, he gathered a small fleet and headed for Earth, oblivious that it was literally on the humans' homeworld. When he arrived, he was caught unaware. The battle that ensued would cause him to flee to Installation 05, but he was pursued by the UNSC in Amber Clad, the ship piloted by Miranda Keyes. Ironically, Regret likely deeply regretted his actions. It was thanks to his brash behavior and haste to act upon his discovery that he was forced to flee from the human stronghold. This left him isolated from the rest of the Covenant, and as a result, he became much easier to hunt down. Regret may have had an army at his disposal and technology that had been reverse-engineered by one of the greatest empires ever recorded, but none of that would change the fact that he was an old man at the end of his rope. He ran as fast as he could, but his pace was outmatched by the demon. His final altercation took place within one of the many bizarre structures found across the surface of Halo Rings, an ancient stone edifice that appeared to be much older than the ring itself. When the chief entered the chamber, Regret was almost certainly stricken with panic. His bodyguards each fought and fell at the hands of their adversary. Like his Sangheli compatriots, he wasn't going down without a fight, though. His gravity throne had been outfitted with a powerful golden beam that functioned similarly to certain fuel rod cannons employed by hunter gestalts. Needless to say, he fired beam after beam towards his attacker, even utilizing some kind of short-range teleportation technology to position himself behind his quarry. The chief was just too fast, though, and before he even had a chance to regret any more of his choices, the demon boarded his vehicle. In an instant, the chief's fist hurled towards his feeble skull as if it was the Kool-Aid Man on a collision course with a brick wall. But upon impact, the red liquid that poured from the newly created orifice tasted more like copper instead of cherries.
Why was it not destroyed with the rest of their fleet?
Hod Rumnt, or as he's more commonly known, the Prophet of Mercy, was elected to the High Council before Regret and Truth were even born. Technically speaking, the player never really fights him, but I wanted to talk about him anyways. Hod was deeply religious, far more so than his hierarch compatriots. Because of this, he eventually relinquished his political positions in favor of making a greater connection with his gods. He became a philologist, which was the leader of a specific sect of priests that operated within the Forerunner Dreadnought that was located at the heart of High Charity. Thanks to his position, he was present when Mendicant Bias explained to Ord and Lod that humans were the true reclaimers of the Forerunner's legacy. The AI then attempted to awaken the Forerunner Dreadnought, and Hod was completely prepared to allow him to leave, but a few Let Go worms had interfered with the inner workings of the ship. This stopped the vehicle from fully engaging, and before Mendicant could attempt to leave again, the realization of his words struck him. If what he said was true, the Great Journey was a lie and humanity were the rightful rulers of the Covenant, not the Sanshayum. With this realization, Hod disconnected Mendicant from the Dreadnought. He had heard everything, a secret so deadly that it would surely destroy the Covenant as they knew it. So, Lod and Ord, soon to be Truth and Regret, offered him a deal. Ascend to the position of Hierarch with them and lead the Covenant against humanity. Undoubtedly, a large part of Hod still believed in the promises of the Great Journey, and if he were a Hierarch, he could personally help usher in their ascent to godhood by helping activate the rings. He agreed, and along with his Sanshayum brethren would ascend and take the name Mercy. Eventually, Truth and Mercy would initiate what would become known as the Great Schism by first creating a change of leadership within the Covenant. Truth and Mercy believed that the elites had become too problematic and that they needed to be replaced by the Jiralhanae, or the Brutes. Once their roles had been swapped, they were branded as betrayers, and the two prophet hierarchs ordered the deaths of the Sangheli, igniting an immense Covenant civil war that would serve to be the group's final breaking point. Hod had previously protested when his own species was almost completely stripped of any military presence in favor of the Sangheli, so it makes sense that he would happily go along with this restructuring. As Mercy and Truth set to begin their journey to Earth, High Charity was attacked by the Flood, and swarms of infection forms laid siege on their positions. The brutes that had been escorting them to their exit fought the Flood, but one infection form managed to slip past their defensive line and quickly lunged onto the prophet's neck. It wrapped its tentacles around his throat and began choking him. When Tartarus, the chieftain of the brutes, stepped forward to remove the parasite, Truth stopped him. He planned to leave Mercy for dead so that he could become the one and only Hierarch, leaving no one else in a position to question his rule. Much like the death of Regret, Mercy's downfall was also deeply ironic. His cohort had shown him absolutely no mercy, and he had shown none to the Sangheli that had protected him for so long. Somewhat confused, Tartarus obeyed this order. an order that any elite likely would have questioned, making Mercy's seeming disdain for the Sangheli his ultimate downfall. Before he was fully consumed, the chief arrived on High Charity and stumbled upon the feeble Saint-Shayum. In a moment of what could be considered mercy, John bent down and wrenched the infection form from the prophet's throat. The motion snapped his serpentine neck and ripped the infection form apart, killing them both instantly. At the very end of the hardest mission in Halo 2, perhaps the whole series even, is fittingly a particularly deadly elite. When the Prophet of Truth declared the elites to be traitors to the Covenant, all hell broke loose within High Charity as fights began all across the megastructure's different districts. Thrust directly into the middle of it was the Master Chief, who did his best in the chaos of the circumstances to easily eliminate enemies or simply slip away when they were otherwise engaged. Moments before the Flood invaded and things became even more dire, the Chief found himself within the Mausoleum of the Arbiter, a large chamber that contained the bodies of every Arbiter that had existed prior to the current iteration. He, of course, had no idea what the purpose of this place was, but it was likely due to the significance of this chamber that it had become the stage for a show of unprecedented violence. When he initially entered the vast room, he was undoubtedly blown away by the sheer quantity of elites and brutes engaged in a vicious battle. They fell in line, one at a time, ready to play, but there was no time to lose. He had to move. He was witnessing the breaking of the Covenant in this very room, and he needed to take advantage of the infighting. Before he knew it, only the strongest had survived, and of course, he was chief among them. He'd become a shadow on the wall, utilizing the darker portions of the room to stealthily dispatch each foe with a careful thwack to their spine or a well-placed carbine burst to their hairy helmeted head. Once the majority had fallen, a group of 3 elites entered from the door opposite of the way he had. Taking up the rear was a particularly deadly Sangheli, wearing an unusual combination of armor that the chief had never seen up until this point. Originally, this elite was the simple result of a coding error, but thanks to this mistake, a rather strange enemy was created, one that was embraced when Halo 2's 10th birthday rolled around. Much like Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, Halo 2 was re-released with updated graphics around its 10th rotation around the sun, and when that happened, this elite was given not 1, not 2, but 3 unique models in the updated version of the game. The glitch that makes this elite's armor weird also affects which armor he's wearing. Each time he's loaded in, he's donning a slightly different permutation, of which there are at least 16 different combinations. The most important variable that contributes to his odd appearance is his helmet, which can be a Miner, Honor Guard, Counselor, or a glitched Counselor. The last variant is obviously just a glitch, and almost certainly not canon, so let's ignore it in this particular instance. This variability means we don't know exactly which helmet he actually wore, producing a very minor canonical conundrum. To be clear, this warrior doesn't have a name or a backstory, but he is part of a group referred to as the Lights of Sanghelios. These legendary lizard men were one of the highest ranks attainable within the Covenant Honor Guard, an already highly specialized role. Honor Guards are typically outfitted with red garb, but the Lights of Sanghelios instead wear all white. Due to the fact that this particular elite sometimes wears a Counselor helmet, we could surmise that he may well have been the leader of that clandestine group. He enters the arena as if he's a boss fight too. I mean, come on, just look at this guy's aura. We seriously need an official story for this dude at some point. I'm talking to you, Haruspis. Get on that, man. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Chief kicked his ass. He's dead as fuck. Before Tartarus became chieftain of the Brutes, he served under his uncle, Maccabeus. His patriarch was deeply religious and known for his unwavering faith in the Forerunners. At the time, the Brutes were relatively low within the Covenant leadership and were intentionally given dated equipment in case they ever decided to lash out at other members of the Covenant. The Sangheli didn't trust them, and as such, typically gave them very little military power. At the time, Tartarus was in charge of security for his uncle's crew aboard the ship Rapid Conversion. He, along with his uncle, would be some of the first individuals to ever come into contact with humanity on a human colony called Harvest. Brief moments of diplomacy took place between the human and alien parties, but it was short-lived and quickly turned into one of the first real battles of the Human Covenant War. Tartarus participated in the conflict, quickly learning to hate humans, as they, rightfully so, killed members of his pack. One of these humans just so happened to be a legendary Marine known as Avery Johnson. Thanks to the misinterpretation of information collected by a luminary aboard their ship, Maccabeus had promised his crew a treasure trove of Forerunner artifacts. As I explained before, this was incorrect. What they had actually found was humanity. Tartarus had become furious that his uncle's supposed promise of riches had so far proven false, and the lives of his friends had been lost in the process. This newly discovered race of aliens had killed many of his packmates, and Tartarus blamed his uncle for their deaths. He eventually confronted Maccabeus and challenged him for his position of leadership. An act such as this was common practice for the Jha'Kaar and was how their culture cultivated new leaders. Unfortunately for Maccabeus, he had just been wounded from his engagement with the humans, and as a result, he was easily defeated by his nephew. Tartarus then claimed his uncle's gravity hammer, the Fist of Rumpt, which had been a part of his family for generations. Once he returned to High Charity, Truth had picked up on his desire to ascend through the ranks and recognized he may be a useful tool in helping him eliminate the Sangheli. The two of them would often meet in secret to discuss highly sensitive plans and his eventual future in the Covenant. Many years after the initial conflict with humanity, Tartarus' relationship with Truth continued until he finally ascended to Chieftain of the Brutes. This was a crucial step in Truth's plan to make Tartarus the leader of the entire Covenant military. Once he was chieftain, Truth had Tartarus brand Lat Ravamee with the Mark of Shame, and forced him to take the mantle of Arbiter. Thel was assigned the task of eliminating a group of heretics that had broken away from the Covenant, and then told to acquire the quote-unquote sacred icon, which was actually just Installation 05's activation index. Once the Arbiter had acquired the device, Truth ordered Tartarus to kill Thel and take the icon, claiming he had obtained it instead of the Arbiter. He attempted to do just that by flinging him down an immense elevator shaft using the Fist of Rumpt, but the Arbiter was saved by an unlikely ally, the Gravemind. With the monster's help, Thel would eventually track Tartarus down. Both he and Avery Johnson, one of the men present for the beginning of the Covenant's long war against the humans, would work together to finally kill the Jha'Kaar. Tartarus had been equipped with a special kind of energy shielding, one that made him impervious to virtually all attacks. The only way to strip him of his protection was to overload it with several rounds of a particularly powerful weapon, in this case, a beam rifle. While the Arbiter fought the brute in a small area, Johnson perched just outside, taking shots at the Jha'Kaar whenever he found an opening. It was thanks to his help that Thel was able to injure Tartarus and, after a while of fighting, end his brief reign as Chieftain of the Brutes. Okay, that's all I've got, but don't click away. Do not click away. Don't do it. Do not click away. You still here? Okay, good. If you enjoyed this video and you want to give me a hand because you enjoyed it, then can you do me a quick favor before you go? Will you like, subscribe, leave a comment, but more importantly, you want to go watch another video of mine? That would be awesome. Please, please. I have two recommendations for you. The first of which I mentioned earlier in this video. I made a video a little while back about all of the different collectibles in each Halo game and whether or not I believe the protagonist of said Halo game actually collected them canonically. The answer is yes, but I go into great detail in that video, so if that sounds interesting, you should go watch that. Also, I made a Half-Life 2 Bestiary. It's complete. It has everything from Zen to, the Combine, everything. It didn't do very well. If you want to help me out, you can go watch that as well. Yeah. Otherwise, I guess that's all I've got. Oh, I made a Discord too. Maybe I'll link that somewhere. You guys could join it and we could talk about cool stuff. Only rules are just don't be an asshole. Yeah, be open-minded. Yeah. All right, well, that's all I've got for real. For real, that's all I've got. So, yeah, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go play some Halo. Later.